Coming up on today's edition of Locked On Eagles, the Eagles are staying put with a lot of in-house decisions in free agency. What could be their next move on the outside at wide receiver? Could they trade for one, or should they pursue a pass catcher in the draft? We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by my co-host Gino Camilleri. Happy Friday, everybody. It's episode 5 of 5. Download it into your phone. Wherever you get the podcast, we are available on all platforms 5 days a week. On YouTube as well in video form. Subscribe to the YouTube page, especially with the draft season upon us, Gino. We're going to be churning out podcasts in video form, also exclusive video content, and we're talking birds on Twitter all throughout the day at Locked On Birds, at DiBiase LOE, and at GC24_football. Gino did a show Thursday about the re-signing of Derek Barnett, got into the Penn State Pro Day as well. New wide receiver Zach Pascal met with the media, so Gino had his biggest takeaways Thursday. Again, find that show and 4 others this week on any podcast platform. Gino, people were not happy. I know you talked about Barnett yesterday. People were not happy about the Barnett re-signing, and, rightfully so. I think considering the liability he's become the last 2 years, more penalties than sacks for the majority of the time, even though I understood the logic of a deep, cheap defensive end 3 or 4, at the same time, I would have liked to move on from him as well. I think it's more, though, Barnett was like a built of a frustration with this whole. I think fans are starting to think the Eagles' mindset is they're trying to run it back with the 2021 core, where I'm upset more so that why free agents don't want to come to Philadelphia more than the Eagles' actual strategy. I don't think this is what they're trying to do. I just think we all know now that the draft is where the big change is going to come this offseason after, you didn't land some free agents like Marcus Williams and some top receivers. I think people are starting to wonder, were they just being complacent and running it back with 2021? I didn't see that.
I think the Barnett move kind of is a multitude of different reasons as why it came to be. One, I don't think there was really a huge market for Derek Barnett. Let's be honest. I mean, look at the player.
Which I think is why some are frustrated too, though, because they're like, see, nobody else wanted him.
And the double-edged sword to that discussion, Lou, and I mentioned this on yesterday's show, I go back to Brandon Graham when they went through that Billy Davis ordeal, right? And he was playing out of position. He didn't really ever kind of once bat an eye about it. He kind of put his ego in check and matured as an edge rusher. I hope Derek Barnett can realize, hey, man, there wasn't a market for you. This team was one of the only teams that was willing to re-sign you, and they did it on a 2-year extension after you hit free agency. They weren't even willing to give you a contract extension. If that's not an ego killer and these penalties continue to come about and his liability of play continues as the way it was, yeah, it's going to be a big issue. But if he does take a step in the right direction, I believe you get a cheap option for your 4th option off of the edge. He's not going to be a guy that's playing all 3 downs. We know that. That'll help keep the other guys fresh. He knows the system. Heck, Lou, if they do end up taking David Ojabo after that injury, realistically, the guy might not play this season. So you might need a guy there that can fill in for this season at least. And I'm sure it's structured some way to where it's almost like a 1-year deal with backloaded money to make it a 2-year deal.
Oh, it's probably a super cheap deal. And again, that's why, if you zoom out, if you say, hey, here's a 25-year-old that's had, in 4 or 5 seasons, at least 4.5 to 5 sacks. He's got a high floor, good run defender. He doesn't have the ceiling of a 15th overall pick, but that is where he was picked for a reason. He is productive. If you said all of that, and by the way, he's on a cheap deal as your 3rd or 4th, rotational edge, gives you some flexibility to draft an injured player like a Jabo, like you did with Landon Dickerson last year. You have that flexibility. All of that sounds great. It's just you have to, you can't really do that zoom out with Barnett because, as you said, he has been such a liability for the last few years, and now he's finally getting that ego check which is needed because Philadelphia hasn't really held him accountable the last couple of years. He is
not at all.
If anything, he keeps getting promoted more and more. Like, they didn't bring back Michael Bennett after 2018 because they wanted Barnett now to be the full-time starter opposite Brandon Graham. And even last year, Brandon Graham gets hurt. Barnett has this huge opportunity as a complete full-time starter that's not really rotating, and he churns in his worst season when normally guys have career years in a contract season. So I just thought, considering the role he's now going to be in, I would have preferred a change of scenery. I would have preferred, a draft pick with a deep class. And Barnett doesn't deter you from taking one. I don't need every hole to be filled in free agency. And I feel like considering Riddick, Sweat, and Graham, you could have brought in a rookie with Teron Jackson as well to be a part of a rotation and not really need him. So I get both sides of it. I would have preferred to move on. But I think, again, fans, they don't like Barnett because, as the head coach says, it's always him.
Yeah.
But I think, again, it's just a continual buildup of frustration because they've heard all the news of them swinging out, and they bring back Anthony Harris and Derek Barnett and Fletcher Cox, a lot of in-house moves. And they're like, last year wasn't good enough, which I get. But, again, this wasn't their intent, and there's still a massive draft coming up where you have 4 picks on day 1 and day 2. So I'm not panicking just yet. And I know the Eagles have been trying more. I'm just, again, more frustrated, disappointed with why free agents don't want to be. Some of them don't want to be in Philly.
Well, Hassan Reddick wanted to be here, right?
Yeah. And you can't ignore when me and you talked about the biggest moves, he was one of the top outside of Marcus Williams and Allen Robinson. He was one of the first names we brought up.
He was a top 10 free agent in this class altogether. Right. And the reason I'm not too upset about the Barnett thing is because I know it's going to be cheap. Like, there's no way they're giving this guy north of, I said, $8 million would be the absolute cap at what I would pay this guy a year.
And I'd like to believe they don't rely on him as much anymore either. With the Reddick signing, that makes me feel better about it. Plus, we'll see what they do in the draft.
Yeah, and if you look at Chris Long when they signed him, right, look at the money he got. That was single-digit contract money. And that's what I believe a guy like Derek Barnett should get. But the signing at this position that we all cared about, Hassan Reddick, should not be forgotten. Because this guy is going to take the snaps that the Eagles wanted Derek Barnett to have. The reason they had to sign Hassan Reddick is because this guy didn't work out and you weren't willing to sign him to a long-term deal. And realistically, he would have been the draft pick if he was still on the board.
One pick ahead. Yeah,
14th
overall.
Ahead. That's why I'm not too upset about it. We know their intentions going into the draft, and we know how he said that they're going to address that position in a multitude of ways. So they're not
makes
done
so much sense, by the way, now.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it kind of reminds me of the Sidney Jones pick in 2017. You have, and then you trade for Ronald Darby. You have Jalen Mills, Rasul Douglas, Patrick Robinson. You have flexibility to do that. Dickerson last year, you had such a deep offensive line. So, but again, I would have preferred to move on, and I thought there were other options for that role. But, it also, you mentioned Chris Long. It also kind of feels like when they brought back Vinny Curry in, not last year, was it 2020 or 2019? He left after 20. Yeah, it was 2020. He came back, and he used to be a starter with Brandon Graham, and Derek Barnett and Chris Long were the 3rd and 4th guys rotating through in the Super Bowl season. Vinny Curry comes back, and he's in a different role. That's what's going to happen likely with Barnett as well. And again, I just, for me, it's hard to get really mad about these kind of moves until the Eagles, for me to get super emotionally invested in being upset about this kind of stuff. To me, it doesn't really change the dramatic, long-term outlook when you don't have a franchise quarterback and when you haven't made all these significant picks in the draft, for other positions. That's how you're going to get to the place where you don't have to bring back Derek Barnett and Anthony Harris, is when you build up this offense and defense with long-term players that, and again, quarterback's the one I keep mentioning because that's what recruits people, but so too will be, you mentioned it the other day, having a star-studded defense. So we always knew this offseason, the draft is what was going to propel you into the future.
And what was the most sustainable era of the Philadelphia Eagles in the last 20 years, Lou?
Yeah, the early 2000s.
And why was that?
Defense and quarterback, man.
And where did they acquire said players?
Sustainability at the most important spots, and you got them through the draft. Your head coach, your quarterback, and your lines.
Exactly.
And a star safety in Brian Dawkins. Well, actually everything, because their corners were great.
Yeah.
That team was absolutely loaded.
Yeah, you land guys like Troy Vincent, Sheldon Brown, Lito Shepherd. Draft more of those guys.
Bobby Taylor always, too. So underrated.
Acquire more Darius Slays. Acquire more Hassan Riddicks. Rome wasn't built in a day. You can't fix an entire team in a single offseason. You can't even do it in 2 or 3 in some occasions. And this time, I believe the Eagles are doing it in the right way with the optionality. Ultimately, what Barnett being on the roster does is I don't believe it will force you to overdraft an edge player at 15, 16, or 19 if the top 5 guys are gone.
But what does happen, though, if you draft like a Jermaine Johnson? Because sometimes you want to be careful of, like, you want to have flexibility heading into the draft, but I also don't want to create a log jam at a position and throw out a contract if I know I really like a prospect and I'm likely going to come away with one. Because then what? I mean, if you draft Jermaine Johnson, is Derek Barnett your 5th defensive end?
Well, how they're going to use these guys, Lou. Like, I believe that multiple of these guys, plus Hassan Riddick, will be on the field at the same time.
Well, Riddick's a tweener, too. So, yeah, that does play a role in it as well.
Exactly. So they're going to try and grab another guy. Like Jermaine Johnson would be a perfect example, somebody who could come in on those rundowns early on where he is good. And then maybe you swing in Barnett, split 50-50 with those 2 guys, bring Teron Jackson in for about 25% of the snaps. They want to be able to do stuff like that, Lou. They just weren't able to last year. When you have to throw Jannard Avery out there every other down to rush the quarterback, yeah, there's probably going to be more or actually less options for you to throw out there. Now that they have this wide range of characters up front who are all built drastically different, Josh Sweat from Hassan Reddick, from the guys in the middle, from Milton Williams, who's just like a tweener in his own right, you have so many different options up front to where one of these guys that you're going to bring in the draft, you're going to see what his skill set is and use that part of him right away. And then in year 2, if you could get out from the Derek Barnett contract or you just straight up cut him, you're going to get this guy more playing time.
Or Brandon Graham retires or you move on and, you know, Barnett remains like your DE4, 3 or 4.
Right.
Yeah.
Long term, Lou, you have Josh Sweat, you have Hassan Reddick, then fill in the blanks. Teron Jackson's a great depth piece to have, but you still need 3 to 4 premier pass rushers.
Again, I would have moved on from Barnett, but as long as he's not stopping you from bringing in better talent and stopping you from putting them on the field, because that has happened at times with mostly the regime before this on both sides of the ball. As long as that doesn't happen and Barnett is held accountable, if he becomes a liability again, then again, it's whatever for me, but I totally get the frustrations. Gino, we'll go to the offensive side of the football coming up next. The Eagles reportedly were interested in Miami Dolphins and could still be wide receiver DeVante Parker potentially for a trade after Tyreek Hill signed in Miami. Me and you brought that up on Wednesday's show. So we will get into that possibility versus maybe drafting one or another trade target, what our preferences would be there. That's coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. And guys, you can bet on most of this stuff at the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's Bet Online. After months of playing, college basketball has determined the top teams for the Final Four, and they'll determine this year's national champion this coming week. Like I said, you've got the NFL offseason. You've got the push for the playoffs going on in the NBA and the NHL right now. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs on these incredible sports and sports information from all the latest odds, contests, and player props. You name it, they remain your top spot for all the latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season as well. Head over to the website today, betonline.net, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, Eagles fans, welcome back into this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. The NFL each and every day continues to just have loaded amounts of news. Today, not so fun. A lot of it just a mess of a Cleveland Browns press conference with Deshaun Watson. Finally took a nice break from all the massive trades, although I've enjoyed it a lot. So guys, make sure though you're following the Locked On NFL podcast. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories across the league every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your shows, just like ours. Gino, talking about, continuously free agency and now a transition. Next week, we're going to really dive into draft content because, as we've established, the draft is going to be what propels you into the future, what makes you attractive for free agents, where you're going to find pretty much your long-term core. As we knew for the most part, we wanted some top free agents, like the one you landed in Hassan Riddick. You had cap space. You're still going to make moves, but the draft has always been the focus. When it comes to receiver, I'm going back and forth now with this because the Eagles were reportedly interested yesterday and still are, I would imagine after a day, interested in trading for wide receiver DeVante Parker from the Miami Dolphins. We know, too, me and you have mentioned Laviska Shenault from the Jaguars. He's being shopped. Where's your head at when it comes to the preference of maybe trading for one of these, a buy low on a former top pick at the position in the top 2 rounds versus drafting somebody? Like, would you prefer to trade for DeVante Parker or draft somebody in the first round? Where's your head at there?
Porque a las dos. Like, why not both? Like, why can't we do both in this
You
situation?
love your cake and getting to eat it too.
I mean, Lou, realistically, what's it going to cost to acquire one of these guys? I mean,
Yeah.
Laviska, maybe a 4th-round pick at the most. DeVante, probably a 6th-round pick.
For me, it's hard to, even if it doesn't cost much, like DeVante Parker is a former 1st-round pick that's likely going to be a starter. But if I draft like Treylon Burks, I'm going to want him to start.
I think we can do exactly what we talked about at the defensive end situation, Lou, in the edge position. Beyond this year, at wide receiver, what do you have? DeVonta Smith and Quez Watkins. Can you guarantee me Jalen Reagor, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Greg Ward, and Zach Pascal will all be Philadelphia Eagles this time next year?
No, for sure.
So why not? Why not use a late-round asset, something they've done plenty of times, and realistically, they could probably just do a pick swap plus the player and get DeVante Parker. That's the type of trade I would try to do. And this type of guy who was a former high pick
Who
and
destroyed the Eagles in 2019.
Oh my God, massacred him. That was
Ronald Darby specifically. Let's be real.
Yeah, that was a great game by him. I forgot how underrated that like really got him his contract extension. If you think about it, yeah. But contract wise, not even bad. He's only on $12 million over the next 2 years. What I see with the trio of DeVante Parker plus DeVonta Smith plus Quez Watkins with a little bit of the other guys thrown in there and Zach Pascal is optionality. Like, I don't see anybody but DeVonta Smith taking near 100% of the snaps. Like, there are areas that I would rather see a guy like DeVante Parker than Quez Watkins. Like, on a 10 to 12-yard route, I'd much rather see DeVante Parker in a 50-50 situation, right? Or maybe if you get a big-bodied rookie that you like, if you draft Drake London, for example. I don't think Quez Watkins would excel in that area, but I would see him excel down the field. Or you put all 4 of them on the field at the same time, and you're able to run these empty sets, which teams like Buffalo, who exceed in that area and are now what you should aspire to be as an offense, they were running empty till the cows came home. The Eagles don't have the personnel to do that. For years, they couldn't even run 11 personnel, Lou. They were having to run 12 out of necessity.
Sometimes 13, man.
I'm done with those days, man. I know they want to run a little bit more 12 personnel. I think if they do, it'll be more of an H-back type of look. If you bring in a guy like Isaiah Likely potentially in the draft who could do that, or they're interested in Trey McBride, I heard. They're interested in Charlie Collier out of Iowa State. So they're interested in these move type of guys. But at wide receiver, long-term, you have 2 guys right now. You're not even going to be guaranteed to land one of the top guys. I mean, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave realistically could be gone before you draft. Teams could love them and pull a move like
I think they have a great chance, though, to also...
They could land the other guys, though, too.
I mean,
Chris Olave, Drake London, like those guys will be there.
Like, I like Parker. I like the option of Shenault as well. I would prefer, if I can only pick one, like, big investment here left at receiver this offseason, I would prefer the draft. This poll was pretty interesting. Our fans said 42% they would rather trade for DeVante Parker, 38% draft a receiver early, 20% trade for Laviska Shenault. Parker makes a lot of sense. Again, he would be a great complement to Smith and Watkins. He'd be super cheap, 29 years old, former first-round talent. But I would probably choose a draft if I could only have one because, as you mentioned, you mentioned a lot of names there. We've brought up Treylon Burks, Drake London, Jameson Williams from Alabama, both Ohio State kids, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Like those 5, I think at least 1, maybe 2 are going to be there if you want one at 15 or 16. And we didn't even mention, like, I think Jahan Dotson and Christian Watson are both worth a first-round pick. Daniel Jeremiah finally got Watson in a first-round mock draft. We've been saying since the combine that he's worthy of that selection. So I really like this class. Gino, another part of this equation is how many picks does Howie plan to have day one? Like if he's planning on doing what Mike Garafolo said today on The Fanatic, that he's going to really push to get some ammunition in 2023, which will be tough. It takes two to tango. But if he's trying to do that, that's part of the equation as well of, hedging your bets and bringing in somebody like Parker. Today's episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It's Built Bar. It tastes just like a candy bar. You wouldn't even know the difference if you had one. To be honest, if you brought one to the movie theaters, instead of your guilty pleasure of a Kit Kat, a Reese's Cup, a Hershey's bar, Nestle Crunch, whatever it is, you wouldn't tell the difference. I wouldn't bat an eye. Built bars are covered in 100% chocolate. It's all of that same incredible flavor, but it's absolutely none of the guilt. Built bars only have 130 calories in most bars, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of packed protein. Plus, flavors for every taste bud. Mint brownie, coconut almond, and new for this month, it's white chocolate, cookies, and cream. Plus, they have the first ever protein-infused marshmallow bars. You got to check out these flavors of the marshmallow bars as well. They've got cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, and banana cream pie. So good. Make sure you try out all these various flavors at Built.com, and I can get you 15% off today when you use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com.
Well, talking about guys that they're rumored to be interested in, we talked about the Baylor players and we talked about their interest in Jalen Petrie.
Yeah.
Well, there's also another individual that they mentioned in there, Taekwon Thornton. That's a guy that doesn't have first round buzz, but should be around in day 2 for them to land. So maybe they're thinking exactly what you just said, Lou. Maybe a wide receiver might not be the top option. So if we can go out and get a DeVante Parker just in case, it's not the worst avenue to go out and take. Because if you walk into next season with Zach Pascal being your 4th best option, I think you're in a pretty decent place with a sprinkle of Greg Ward, with Kenny Gainwell's ability out of the backfield, with Miles Sanders, Boston Scott,
and
back
with the
there
top
again.
2 receivers that I just don't think
we haven't even mentioned Dallas Goedert, Lou.
Yeah, right. And like in the 2 top receivers that are just, I don't think getting enough love this offseason for what they can do in year 2 as starters. DeVante,
can I say this right now? DeVante, I will guarantee will go over 1,200 yards next year.
But that's the thing is and we've talked about how we think some of the biggest improvement will just come from Jalen Hurts himself improving. We've wanted to add an Allen Robinson or a Christian Kirk at the right price, or, we like the idea of a top pick or Parker, Shenault. Like, we've recognized how important it is to have at least 3 really good receivers complementing styles. You have to be able to throw 30 plus times to win consistently, but you can't ignore as well the steps that the guys you already have in house could take. So Howie could recognize that as well. They're clearly higher on Quez Watkins than a lot of people are. And they might be like, yeah, as you mentioned, we could go for more of a George Pickens on day 2 or day 3, and Justin Ross from Clemson, someone later on, one of the SMU players. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to, in my head, I'm just throwing names out there. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the equation too, is what you have in house.
Definitely so. And that's one thing that I think the Eagles do a really good job of, is addressing their in-house needs first by taking care of the guys that address most of those needs. And they drafted DeVonta Smith to address that X position, the guy who can
like they
win.
Don't have a top receiver, like a star wide receiver 1 already. They already have that. I mean,
he's a bona fide star in this league by now.
And get him the ball more. I know we should add another receiver for this Eagles team, but why don't you give him more than 5 to 6 targets a game?
Yeah.
I mean, he should have more than 916 yards next year. That's going to be a huge part of your increase in passing efficiency, is just getting the guy you already have the ball more. Quez too. I mean, Quez Watkins last year for most of the first half of the year was on like a 700 to 900 yard pace, and he still almost cracked the 700 yard mark when they totally went away from him in the screen game and he wasn't really that involved in the second half of the year because of how much they were running.
Yeah, ideally I would like DeVonta Smith's stat line to almost look like Kobe Bryant field goal percentage, like 11 for 20, 11 catches on 20 targets. I would love that. That would be a scenario where you have a bona fide star, which I think you drafted last year, and he's only going to get better this year. He's down training. They did that big article on him. I don't remember what site it was, but it was pretty interesting, going down DeVonta Smith currently training in the offseason, getting better for next year. He has a full offseason, which he didn't have last year. Quez Watkins knows what his position is in this offense now. He is going to be primed and ready to go. Zach Pascal is going to be a key part, which they had expressly said he is going to be. We know he's going to be a veteran target on that offense. And you have Dallas Goedert and the backs to mix in. It would be great to land one of the top wide receivers, Lou, but just give your guys more options. Give them more opportunity.
Have the quarterback get them the ball more and not miss him. I mean, that's last year. Again, Jalen Hurts doesn't have the best weapons in the league, but I think a lot of the time last year, and we've said this before on the show, the problems in the passing game weren't really about options. I mean, Jalen Reagor getting the ball too much was certainly an issue. They were trying to force feed him and find any way to get production out of him. But I think just getting Smith and Watkins more efficient looks next year and just more looks is really going to help. Again, Quez Watkins, ideally in a perfect world, you're going to want as your third receiver. But Gino, I mean, we've been high on him. He's been a my guy since he came out of Southern Miss in that draft. I think, and some people still view him as just like a deep threat kind of player, just like that kind of niche role. If you saw last year, the contested catches he made, the expanded route tree as his development went through the summer into the regular season, I think he's going to be way more of a complete receiver than people give him credit for.
And I see the one area, I was just like doing the map of the field out in my head. I see Quez really excelling in those yards after the carry area where you get him the ball behind the line of scrimmage, and also like 12.5 plus yards down.
And they went away from him, like in the second half of the year. Yeah. The first half, he was, I mean, it felt like every time he touched the ball in that area, he was getting at least 8 to 9 yards.
Yeah, definitely. And DeVonta Smith, he was kind of, I would say, more in those intermediate areas, but he did a lot of the things as well. Like where they really have to hone in is the middle of the field. I think Zach Pascal will improve the team in that department, and hopefully that can build a little bit of trust, just having a reliable option. Like I'm sure Sirianni understands the player that Pascal is. I'm sure they had this exact discussion. Like you were going to be a vast part of just building trust in our quarterback to throw it over the middle of the field.
Yeah.
And if they do draft a guy, I think it'll be to that build as well. Like you look at Treylon Burks, who's a perfect player to go over the middle of the field.
Drake London too.
Yeah, exactly. Those big body guys, 6'2", 6'4". Zach Pascal, a little smaller than that, but reliable, big frame, bigger, I would say, catch radius than most. He's a guy that can move in and out of the slot. Just get your guys the ball and trust them. And I think this full offseason of working with guys like DeVonta Smith, Quez Watkins, and so, everybody else that I've mentioned 20 times, it will only help your quarterback get better and your receiver room. And if they do add one of these guys, bringing this full conversation full circle here, you're either going to do it via a trade, which we know is out there, or early on in the draft, but you can't bank on that. And that's why I'm saying, even if you miss in the draft, why not take a flyer with one of the 27 sixth-round picks that you have to go and get DeVante Parker?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like that idea. And yeah, I wouldn't, again, like I would prefer a top draft pick, but I'm okay with that scenario too, because I'm more focused on just getting Smith and Watkins more involved next year and having the quarterback improve. I think that's the biggest way. And, because Smith and Watkins, they had to overcome a lot last year to even produce the way they did. I mean, you mentioned the lack of opportunities across the middle of the football field for both players. The pre-snap motion game, the screen game, reverses and that stuff. DeVonta Smith too did a lot of that at Alabama. And we saw in the playoff game, the play he ripped off in the second half against Tampa Bay, where he splits two defenders, breaks another guy's ankles. Smith is underrated run after the catch ability. They were, not really getting those chances either because of the increased amount of runs. And again, as we mentioned, Jalen Reagor was getting those because those are the easier quote unquote looks. There's just a lot that they had to overcome last year that I think you remove those with improvements this year by your, philosophy and by your quarterback. And I think you've got three staples in the passing game with those two and Dallas Goedert. So, I'm really excited about the receiver group. I think that, regardless of who they bring in, and they're going to bring in somebody, we know they've been trying. This is going to be a group that I think is going to do just fine in 2022.
Yeah, I really hope that this group just knows what is ahead of them and the expectation that they should look to have. They know that DeVonta Smith is a leader on this team. He knows it. He's always been a leader at Alabama. If he even gets better, who arguably was the best player on offense, everybody else around him should look to mimic that work ethic, which is only going to make this team improve, in my opinion. And I think Jalen Hurts and DeVonta Smith are probably the two hardest working guys in terms of your skill position players on the offense. Just let them go out there and play football like they did in that Broncos game. Allow opportunities and plays to be made, and it's only going to explode. Like we saw flashes of it, Lou. We never saw a full game of it. We saw 1 or 2 quarters. What happens when they really do put it all together? That's the next evolution of this offense, and I'm ready to see it happen in 2022 because Nick Sirianni is dang good at putting together a good playbook, and his X's and O's should take off once the personnel is a little better. Having a more reliable weapon in Zach Pascal, potentially drafting more players, the next step for DeVonta Smith in his career, I think things are all falling into place where whoever drops the ball on offense is really going to take the brunt of the negativity. And it's going to be clear who it is once they step on the field on Sundays.
And if you want to draft again, I'm ready to try again with North Dakota State. So I'm okay
I'm
with
there
Christian
with you,
Watson in the first round or Jahan Dotson or one of those guys. If you want to add him again, I'm not upset that they haven't added a receiver yet. It was more of the reasons, but yeah, I think there's still plenty of opportunities from what you have in house and bringing in Pascal and trades in the draft. There's still a lot of opportunities to add players, especially at the wide receiver position. We'll dive more into it, Gino. Eventually we'll have our ranking summit where we get deep into who we like in the class at all of these positions and more. Draft talk really gets bigger next week. So make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Eagles podcast wherever you get your shows. We're free and available 5 days a week on YouTube as well in video form and on Twitter. Hit us up at Locked On Birds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. Thanks for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Now make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring the NFL draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. Like I said, free and available wherever you get your shows, just like all Locked On podcasts. I'm Louis DiBiase for Gino Camilleri signing off. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.